earlier, like, no one's going to go to this. Why don't we go to this? And we have a full group, and Mark's our fifth parent in here. What we wanted to do is we have a lot of people that join our meetup groups and say, you know, we've got kids and, you know, we don't know how to talk to them about these things, and we really want to meet other parents and kind of figure out what they're doing. And so when we were putting the panel together, we were trying to find different, not necessarily parenting styles, which we have extremely different parenting styles, but especially Sarah and I, we might go toe-to-toe. But we wanted to make sure that we had different situations, different ages of kids, and just different ways of doing things. And so what I'll do is I'll introduce some people, and you guys can introduce yourselves actually, and just kind of talk about what your kind of philosophy is on parenting a secular child. We'll start with Mark.
Well, my name is Mark. I have two children, an 11-year-old girl and a 14-year-old boy. As far as my parenting style as it relates to being secular or atheist, I've really emphasized to them that I don't think that they can call themselves atheists. I think that they're children of atheists. To me, the most important thing about being a free thinker or atheist, or however you want to categorize it, is to instill in them an ability to think, to examine things and decide for themselves. I hope and I fully expect at some point they'll come out on the other side as atheists. There may be, especially with my daughter, a period of rebellion where she's fundamentalist or something like that. But you know, so far, actually up to two, she is the one who more self-identifies as an atheist. She's looking for a fight or looking for an argument a lot of times. But they both seem to be thinking it through and at least not calling themselves atheists all the time yet. That, to me, is a big point of emphasis. I want them to come to their own conclusion.
My name's Sarah Moorhead, and don't gasp too much, but I have 6 kids. All right. They are 22, 18, 14, 11, 4, and 2. We have homeschooled for 16 years. So I've done the whole gamut of fundamentalist Christian homeschooling, and now we're secular. And I'm a huge proponent of secular homeschooling. Our parenting style is fairly free range. We're pretty eclectic and laid back. We do encourage a lot of free thought. I think that's kind of going to be a common thread through all of us. And my kids, my oldest kids who were raised in a very fundamentalist Christian household, one doesn't really have an opinion about anything but is not religious. The other one is at the University of Kearney and very involved in atheist groups there. So that's kind of cool. And then the younger kids are still figuring out who they are, which is what we encourage. So I have a daughter similar in age to Mark's who is also very opinionated and the first one to get into an argument about religion and that sort of thing. But you know, she's going to waffle, and she's the one that I would expect to fall into some sort of religion for a little while just to irritate all of us. So.
Nice. Well, my name is Sheila, as you figured out right now. I am the parent of a 7-year-old boy, my only child, and while I tell him the same things that Mark does about you can't call yourself an atheist, you need to make that decision as an adult, he's already that kind of kid, you know, at 5, I think he's saying, don't believe in God, choose not to believe in God.
Where would he get that, Sheila?
The fact that his parents started the Omaha Atheists and is heavily involved in this organization, and he comes to a lot of events, he's pretty much made that decision already. You know, he may change his mind later on when he gets more involved with his friends and they're in church and that type of thing. But I have a very, very strict parenting style with him, and so the laid back thing is that really is important for us to. So it just our big thing is to teach him to think for himself, to look at things and observe things and make decisions based on what he observes, and not just take what everyone says for granted and say, oh yeah, there's a God, there's a Santa there. He figured out the Easter Bunny when he was 3 and Santa when he was 5, so magic isn't real. That's his big thing. So that's kind of how we work with him.
My name is Amy. I have 2. I have a 16-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl. I think my style's pretty laid back. The kids actually got a bit of religious teaching in the beginning, because I wanted them in a private school. The best private school at that time for us was a Christian school. So we went through a lot of throwing salt on their thought processes as far as, religion was concerned. I think my two identify as atheists now. It's not something that I encourage them to do. I said, well, why do you think that way? And lots of, questioning. That's what I do with them.
My name is Don. I have 4 kids, one of which is stepson, 26, and I have a 15, and 13-year-old. I come from a split secular Lutheran house, so there's a lot of interplay there. And I think my main focus with my kids is to teach them the free thought. Teach them to explore and don't shut themselves off, don't stop themselves from thinking. Follow a thought through, make sure you understand what you're doing, and take it from there. I think ultimately, if they do that, I'm hoping they'll go atheism route, but at least they are free thinkers, and that's a start.
All right, now it's up to you guys. What kind of questions do you have, or what do you want to hear us talk about?
Tell us.
I guess I'll start. When it's my uncles, I've got a lot of learning how to handle how you deal with family members talking about God and teaching them.
So the question is, how do we each deal with family members talking about their religion or God with our kids?
And I guess some of that will be, colored by how out you are, as an atheist. And in my particular case, I have been out as an atheist pretty much my whole adult life. So all of the family members that I'm closely involved with, they know how I feel, and there hasn't been a lot of friction about it. But occasionally I will, hear from my kids some conversation that they had, especially when they go to my in-laws, and it's something where I usually, on a case-by-case basis, just if I feel like it's worthwhile, I give kind of the opposing point of view if that seems appropriate. But I'm not as defensive about it as I was when I was younger. So I think that that's just more a factor of my growth as an individual, separate of my parenting style. But yeah, I guess I found that earlier when I was defensive and I was argumentative, it was more counterproductive, and so I do try to be a little bit more measured in my response, and don't give them marching orders to go, tell grandma and grandpa how it really is. Although I've been tempted to do that, I try not to do that, try not to indoctrinate, I guess.
I think that's fairly similar. I try to teach my kids how to approach the situation based on who they're interacting with. I have an aunt who is deeply fundamentalist and religious, but she's genuinely one of the nicest people on this planet. She's not judgmental of other people who believe differently than her. She just has a very firm belief. So she, when we're visiting her, she does crossword puzzles that are all Jesus related, and she talks to the kids about the ark and all these things, and I don't want my kids to base their relationships on what a person believes or doesn't believe. I want them to base their relationship on how they're treated. So she's still respectful. She's just sharing, I really think this. It's important to me. I want to tell you about this. So I don't see that as threatening to my kids, because I want them to think for themselves. I want them to weigh information individually, things like that. So in that situation, I encourage them to, do what they're doing, do what they're supposed to do with her, or if she wants to do this, if they want to make Easter cookies with crosses on them. It's not a big deal. It's just something they're doing with their, favorite aunt on the planet. So there's that. And then, there's other family members who are a little more direct, and it's more judgmental. It's more, if you don't believe this, do you know you're going to a scary place? Then I step in. Then I'm going to say, that's not okay, we're not going to do this, and I think it's appropriate to set limits in that situation. So for me, I really do try to approach it more from, let's look at how this is being presented. I'm not offended when someone tells my kids about Santa Claus. I don't know why I would be offended if someone tells them about Noah. It's kind of the same thing in my book. So.
Well, and I think the important thing to remember is that you are going to maintain relationships with these people, and unless they're doing something specifically against what you're trying to teach, keep the communication open and really talk to those people, whether they be your family or your friends, and say, you know, it's totally okay if you say, I believe this, but it's entirely different to tell that child, no, you're wrong, and this is what is real, and try to tell them what to think, rather than just saying what they believe and let them make their own decisions.
Yeah, I think I'm the same thing. It's, you know, we, like I said, with the early years where they had the Christian message being presented to them, well, what do you think about that? You know, well, you know, if is grandma being mean? Well, no. Okay, then she gets to believe that, and you're believing this, so that's okay, right? So that's how I
Right.
dealt with it.
And I'm the same way. We know that they're going to be interacting with people who are believers in whatever.
We all do.
We
And
all-
all of
yeah.
us have to go through that.
We all have to go through that. What we have to make sure is that the people talking to them, if possible, are not trying to scare them into thinking a certain way, that they're not forcing them to do things, religious things, behind our back. So the most important thing, I think, is to just keep the communication open. If grandma wants to take them to church, maybe that's okay, depending on what kind of church it is, of course. You know, do they want to talk about, do they want to talk about God with my kids? That's fine, as long as the communication is open, so the kids will come to me and talk to me about it. Don't feel scared enough to hide it.
Yeah. If you talk to the relative and set like clear, the thing is like prayer, like grandma, she always wants to have prayer before grace before him. So, and we're fine with like at her house, you know, it's her house, but it's kind of like, well, when you come over, like this is our house, we don't really, like that's not a, and if you had specific conversations saying this makes us feel uncomfortable that you're insisting on doing this at our house, and they still don't respect that, is there, do you have any experience?
Well, my brother-in-law is very, very Christian and has 8 children and homeschools.
Always one of those weirdos.
Bear in mind,
We know about
bear in
those.
mind they homeschool specifically for religious reasons. But their whole thing is that they always pray before meals, and you know we go up there and they know we're atheists, but they don't necessarily encourage. You know, they don't say anything to us. What I would talk to you about your child about is, you know, when we go to grandma's house, grandma likes to pray before meals. You don't have to pray if you don't want to. Or if you want, you can just sit there silently. And the same thing at your house. You know, you can talk to them and say, you know, Mom, it's totally okay if you want to pray, but we're not going to pray with you. We'll sit there for a couple minutes, you know, or a minute and just be quiet, but we're not going to pray with you.
One of the things, my in-laws are very, very religious, and like to the point that my mom invited them to go to her church when they were in town visiting, because they never miss church, and they wouldn't go with her because it's a different denomination, so they couldn't even. So they decided it would be better to miss church than go to the wrong church. I don't know. But they're very sweet people. It was just, you know, that's the level of devotion they have, and they always pray before any. So it wasn't a conflict, because we knew it was something they weren't going to bend on, because they've been like this for 50 years. So it wasn't a hill we were willing to die on. But what we did was there are plenty of secular like grace things you can say that we found, and so we said, well, you know what, that's fine. Let's be grateful for the things that we have and here. And so we give the kids things they can say. And it's stuff like, thank you for the farmers who work so hard, and it's actually thanking, taking a minute to be grateful for the people who did bring this stuff to you, and that sort of thing. And it circumvented, it fit our belief system. We didn't feel like we were praying to anything imaginary. And I don't know that they noticed, quite frankly. In their mind, before we eat dinner, we're all sitting around and holding hands and saying these wonderful things. So they're like, yay, So it might be something, kind of just more accommodating everyone's needs. For some reason, they have to mutter things before they eat. That is very important to them. So, okay. Thanks, Mom, for bringing it in.
I was going to say one last thing. Your story reminded me. My daughter did something like that at Thanksgiving. I think it was last year. It was at my in-laws. And beforehand, she just decided to write something, you know, to say before the meal, and she got up and she read it, and it was secular. I don't know if that was by design, but she did that. But as far as your question, I don't know how deferential I would be if somebody has specifically been asked not to do it in my home. I think I'd be tempted to respond in some way, whether it's stand up and walk away from the table. That crosses a line for me. I'm going to be pretty deferential in their home, you know, house rules, all that. But if I've had a conversation with somebody specifically, it would depend on the relationship and how far you want to push that.
I think that's the key issue.
Eating. I'd be passing out food. Mom, if you want to try, you go right ahead, but the food's hot. I'm going to eat that.
Which is pretty much what we've been doing.
Yeah,
And
that's
this
the
goes
key.
to anything with parenting. There are boundaries in our daily lives.
Right.
The home is one kind of boundary. When you're out is another kind of boundary. There are things that you're going to allow children to do or people to interact with your children with on the outside that you're not necessarily going to prevent inside. And you don't have to let people inside if they're not going to follow what you believe. You have control over that. You don't have control over the outside per se, or maybe you shouldn't necessarily, but inside your own boundaries you do. And that's okay.
I was just going to say, I think it also boils down, my two priorities with parenting boil down to safety and sanity. So if everybody's safe and nobody's losing their cool, that's the important thing. So for us, everybody stayed more sane to accommodate in that way, rather than to argue with grandparents, ruin the entire visit, make it a whole stressful thing. That was okay with us. If it makes you crazy to still do that and accommodate, and you're going, but I still am not okay with this, then don't be okay with it, and that's fine too. And so, I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's just within your own comfort zone and your family's comfort zone. So, you know.
Who's sanity takes priority?
Yeah. That would be mine. Yeah.
Some of the little things that, like I do, I got a very good relationship with my in-laws who are very fundamentalist. But like when they say grace, my son's of the age where getting him just to sit still for a few minutes is a problem anyway. But, you know, maintaining eye contact with him, he knows that, you know, Mom and I, we don't close our eyes, don't bow our heads when they're saying grace. But, and if it does, you know, like Thanksgiving or something where you do a round robin of what you're grateful for, you're doing something that is appropriate to your beliefs. So it's not like you're surrendering when you're eating with really religious people either. There's ways of letting your children know that you don't believe the same thing just from your behavior when you're saying grace.
It's kind of similar to, I mean, if you're you know, a vegetarian and other people aren't, or you're a vegan and someone isn't, you know, you guys can all sit down and have a meal together without everybody, you know, devolving into fist fights. You know, it's okay. We can all do different things that work for us. And I think that's the difference. So is I think there's some you know, very hardline religious people and hardline seculars as well, who these are hills they're willing to die on. But I think when you're dealing with a family situation, there's so many more factors that come into everything. It's not that black and white, and you have to decide what example do you want to set for your kids, what point do you want to make to your parents. It's how do you find that middle ground? So.
I have a very outspoken 11-year-old, very completely lacking in tact.
I think it might be the age. Yeah.
I think you're right. It is. They hit that age and they start coming out all over the place. I'm just wondering if any of you have had to deal with teaching your children tactfulness in situations with other children, because you know she gets kids at school, even though of course school is supposed to be a secular place. There are plenty of children there that will tell her that God loves you and that like singing the Big Bang Theory song is bad and evil. Seriously. And I'm having a little difficulty with getting that tact into her conversation, where she can have the conversation respectfully without blowing her little top.
Well, I've dealt quite a bit with that, especially with my daughter. I generally drive her to school, and I can tell by the questions of the conversations on the way to school if she's in a mood to pick a fight.
It's 5 minutes into the morning, isn't it?
Well, kind of a side effect has been, it's been a filter for me, because I realize what I sound like sometimes, and hearing it and then seeing how she needs to learn some tact has been helpful, you know, to help me relearn, you know, how I interact with people. And I haven't really completely figured it out, but yeah, she'll be told by, you know, kids at school she's going to hell and things like that. And I've tried to teach her to handle that tactfully. I don't know how often it actually sinks in. That's something I'm still dealing with. My son is a little bit different personality, and those lessons get through a little bit more easily with him than with her. So I guess I don't have an answer yet, but it's definitely something I've dealt with, and I think that the biggest benefit, like I said, has been how it's helped me change how I deal with people.
I think for my kids, one of the things I try to tell them anytime they're in a new situation, before they really get to know people, my thing that I repeat constantly is no politics, no religion. We tend to be a pretty opinionated household regarding both topics, but because my kids don't have that world experience yet and they don't have the information, I don't want them just spouting rhetoric that they overhear us going on about, because they're not getting the full picture, they don't have a full understanding. So I really encourage no politics, no religion. That's just not a basis for friendship right now.
I don't like abiding by that taboo. I think that's one of, especially in religion, that's one of the ways that religion perpetuates generation after generation,
Well,
by making it taboo. I think
the
it's
rest of that,
situational, but I think that general
Yes.
that general taboo against discussing religion, I don't necessarily agree with.
But I'm not saying don't discuss it. So the rest of what I was going to say though is if they're approached, because again, I think it's completely different if someone's coming up to them saying, so, you know, you were talking about this evolution thing or whatever, and I need to tell you why you're wrong and you're going to hell. Well, that's different. You're welcome to stand your ground at that point. I'm talking about initiating. I mean, my kiddo is fairly aggressive with her opinion just because she's related to me. So, but I don't want them initiating that part of it. I don't, because of their viewpoint and because of just their life experience, I don't want them walking into a conversation saying, what do you think of Obama, and tell me what you think about birth control, and let's talk about evolution and the Big Bang. And she's willing to do that. I've seen her do it. And I don't think that's necessarily appropriate for her age range. But again, I mean, we have friends in the neighborhood, that sort of thing, where, you know, or she's in a co-op class where people are talking to her and they initiate the conversation and they're saying, so what church do you go to? Which is usually the gateway conversation. What church do you go to? And she says, we don't go to church, we're atheists. And immediately that starts all of that. Well, yeah, I want her to stand her ground. I want her to have information. She's the first one, though, when the neighborhood kid is explaining to her that she's going to go to hell because Jesus is standing right next to her. Doesn't she believe that? She's the one that comes in, grabs all of her earth science books, goes out, and is sitting down going, no, that's magma, that's not hell. So I'm fairly confident she's okay. But as far as that learning tact, I don't think that has anything to do with belief system. I think that's the age. Every single one of my kids that's at that age has
And
just
personality, I think,
yeah.
too.
Oh my God, I just can't stop.
Because I feel like, you know, with my two, that we're very soft, quiet people, right? And I don't feel like we've ever had any issues with the whole tact thing. It just, I believe largely it's personality. If you have an outward personality, you're going to be more confrontational and not have a filter that you haven't developed yet. You have to go through that learning stage to develop a filter that will help you get through those situations. So.
And we try to teach respect at all times, whenever possible. Even sometimes when you don't feel respect for something, you can feel respect for the person. And that can kind of help sometimes.
And that's a tough
Although it's
lesson to
hard.
learn. Yeah, that's, I mean, that's stuff we all still struggle with as adults. So trying to get kids to understand how do you be respectful while disagreeing with their opinion.
And also remember that you parent by example. What are you doing when people ask you, and the child is there looking at what's going on? That makes a difference
Right,
too.
and my son's only 7, but he's loud, and he'll argue anything whether he's right or not, and he'll argue it to death, even if he's wrong. So,
She's just so withdrawn.
I'm considered the passive atheist of this group, and he's my favorite asshole.
I'm ahead of Dave Silverman now.
You are ahead of Dave.
Ahead of Dave.
You're ahead of Dave. But I mean, we've had instances where other kids whose parents teach Bible school and that type of thing will initiate conversation with him about Jesus, or Jesus died for you on the cross, and his first instinct is like, have you ever seen Jesus? Have you seen God? Can you hear him? Is there any proof at all that that God exists? So he'll automatically go to the science part and say, no, it's your job to prove it. You can't just say something and not have some proof for that. so we just, he's gonna be hard.
I kind of want to bring this back to a couple other areas that you hear and read a little more about. And I realize there's enough written and people telling you how to parent both that you can probably pick what you want to hear in most cases. But in a couple of other areas, and I'm thinking of sex and Santa Claus, the thing you get all the time is tell them on a no basis, don't give them more than they want to know at any time. And so I'm asking if you think that's applicable here, and I think a related question is, how likely is it that they come to you with a question, a religious question, especially of some depth, and how far do you think, you're talking about letting them make up their own minds, as you were a few minutes ago. But how proactive do you need to be in bringing the subject up?
Well, as far as Santa Claus goes, my son, 1 year, he was 4, asked, do you believe in Santa Claus? And my husband totally avoided the question. And then, we did Santa Claus because it's fun. It's just like Halloween for us, to dress up. But the next year, he asked my husband again, he's like, well, do you believe in Santa Claus? And he didn't want to answer the question. He's like, no, I need to know if you believe. And so I kind of jumped in there. I'm like, well, adults really don't believe in Santa Claus. I think it's just kids who believe in Santa Claus. He's like, that's not the question. I asked if you believed in Santa Claus. I'm like, no. And he goes, so is Santa Claus real? I'm like, no. Am I still getting presents? Yes. Okay.
I think, yeah, that's it right there, is what questions are they asking? How much do you base your answer around the question they've asked, and then allow them to control that conversation and say, okay, do you have any more questions? Did I answer the question that you asked fully? Do you understand what I said? If they say, no, what about that? Then you can go on to more depth. That's how I handle that.
And there are times when they come to you and you say, do you really want to know what I believe?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they really want to know what you believe, and sometimes they want to go on believing what they believe.
Yeah.
And that's okay for them to do so.
Sure.
And the main thing is allowing them to feel that they can come to you and talk to you.
Well, and I think, really quick on that, I know you have a question. When my kiddos have come to me, I always, especially the Santa Claus question, I'll touch on the sex one here real quick, but the Santa Claus question, then they've said the same thing, do you believe in Santa Claus, or do you think Santa Claus is real? I kind of of the opinion, once they're ready to ask, they already have enough doubts. So my next question is, well, do you want me to tell you the story, or do you want me to tell you all of the truth? And sometimes they say, I want to hear the story, at which then we do. And then sometimes they say, no, I want to know everything now. Okay, well then, and I tell them. And in our house, we still do Santa Claus, even if they know. I mean, my older kids still get Santa Claus. But I mean, that's just what we do. So it changes nothing, but then they know all of it. And then they kind of get into fun of doing it with everything. As far as the sex, I completely agree with, answering the question on the level it was asked, with as much information as they're asking for. And then, do they need more information? Do they have other questions? Is there someone else they want to talk to? My son, big surprise, got to a point where he didn't want to talk to me about this anymore. And that's okay. So,
we didn't care.
And we were both okay with this. But, and just letting them know that the trust is there, that they can always come to us with anything that, even if they're not comfortable talking to us, we can give them resources to talk to people who have more information. I think that's how you develop that communication for the long term. And it's not necessarily about that immediate conversation. It's about how that immediate conversation affects future conversations. So, oh, you know what? Ivy had a quick question, and then we'll go over.
I'm going to bring the room down, but let's talk about death. How do you, from a perspective, how do you really explain that at, different age levels?
I haven't had to deal with death of anybody close yet. I guess we've kind of touched on the general idea as kind of more of a science-based explanation, finding the beauty in how the world really works instead of trying to create a mythical afterlife to make you feel better about death. So I guess maybe just more of a realistic approach, maybe hopefully laying the groundwork. I haven't had to deal with it. I don't think I've even really had to deal with it. You know, I don't have any aunts or uncles or anybody close that's really died. It's something I don't know how I'm going to react personally when it happens, and I'm going to try and guide my kids through it. But I hope that I've laid enough of a groundwork in a reality-based reaction to it that hopefully that helps.
We had actually several deaths. My children are of the age of reason, though. So, great grandpa's gone, great grandma's gone. But I think for my son, we were sitting in great grandma's funeral, and of course they do the whole "she's a sinner." He looked at me and goes, "She wasn't a sinner." 12, 11, kind of somewhere. And he was so upset, practically in tears. I'm like thinking, oh, I'm gonna have to take this kid out because he's so upset by this. She's a sinner, but she's accepted God, so she's fine now. She can go to heaven, but she wasn't a sinner. So I think for him, that particular situation where we really helped. We had a conversation about the fact that that's something that religion likes to teach. I don't believe that. What do you think? We had to have this entire conversation about the fact that they said she was a sinner, and I think that really influenced him to turn away from the whole religious thing. But with death, like I said, my kids were up, age of reason, so you could say they're just gone. So
My 3-year-old, when he was 3, thought that heaven was in an underground cave in South Dakota. Because my friend, who's the mother of one of his friends, she had a book on heaven, and he asked her to read it to him. And then, of course, she called me later. She said, "I just want to tell you, Ray asked me to read this book on heaven. I just wanted to let you know I didn't pull it out and just start reading it to him. He asked me, and I thought it would be okay." So she was like,
What do these people think of you, Sheila?
I was like, "It's fine." So she had read this book about when people die, they go to heaven. I mean, he's 3, so then when he asked me, "Well, where do people go when they die?" "Well, we bury them in the ground." Pretty simple answer. And so then we went on vacation, and we went into this little cave in South Dakota, which is like 500 feet underground, and take a little tour and everything. And then later on, he's just like, "Oh, where were all the dead people?" When we were on vacation.
So disappointing.
He's like, "Well, where were all the dead people?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Well, we were underground. Wasn't that heaven?" And he's like, "Oh." So it kind of all makes sense. But at 3, he was making, not decisions, but really thinking about what people were telling him and trying to make those connections. So
There's 2 books that if you guys have not read them, you really want to. One is Parenting Beyond Belief, and the other one is Raising Free Thinkers. And they're both by Dale, right?
yeah.
Both by Dale McGowan. And they're fantastic books, and practically the only ones out there that are so comprehensive about parenting from a secular perspective. And the reason I bring those up with this particular topic is they have a great chapter in there talking about death. And one of the things they talk about is how he shows his daughter a beetle that had died. And they just talk about how the body stopped working. So see the beetle, the body's still here, but it's not working anymore. It's never going to work again. It's going to go into the ground and all these things. And it's this great little opportunity to just talk about what happens, what happens when you die. And for our family, we've lost a lot of people over the years. And so we've had a lot of opportunity to have these conversations with our kids. And our kids, they almost seem a little callous about it if you're not comfortable with it. And it's not that they don't care, it's that we just talk about it fairly regularly. We have family members who have died, and they know that means that their body quit working, and that's the end of it, and we have all these wonderful memories and pictures and all these things, and that's why it's important to live a really good life, so that when you are gone, people have wonderful things to remember about you. And I think that's about as clear as you can be. But definitely read those books because they cover a whole ton of stuff, and they're just really awesome. So. Yeah, very sorry.
Hi, Bernie. My daughter's 30 now, and she's a happy secular person, and I asked her how'd she get through it. She was raised in our home. We didn't discuss religion or atheism. It just wasn't anything to us. So, but in those years of junior high and high school, when parents realize I'm losing the kind of sole input that I've had to my child, I asked her what she did, and she said, I just told people what they wanted to hear because it wasn't important to her. And I don't remember being a high school girl, but I do
If you
remember,
ever do, please let us know.
the important things were acceptance among her peers, wearing the right shirt or that kind of thing. She chose not to pick the battle of belief. She picks it now, but at that time it was more important. You know, she had heard from us that religious people were mean and nuts. And she just, and the world's full of people that are mean and nuts. It doesn't have to be about religion. So she chose her friends accordingly.
Yeah, well, my experience as a high school teenager, or high school teenage girl, was way different because my goal was to be as different from anybody else as I possibly could. And I think most people who, we're gonna go at it, man. Most people do try to fit in, and I think that's what religion uses. It's like if you're different, then that's bad. And I think people who are more open to what else is out there, I mean, those are the people who become atheists and agnostics and who question everything else in their lives, is because they've had to and they don't want to be sheep doing what everything everyone else does.
And if ever there was atheists, they'd be fundamentalists.
Just to prove the point.
Yeah. Right.
Are we back to talking about our 11-year-olds again? Josh?
I was just going to see if you guys could comment on, my three boys are pretty young yet, but one of the things I'm planning to do to kind of break down the kind of black and white thinking that you get with a lot of religious people in general is doing a lot of comparative cultures and comparative religions and things like that. Can you guys comment on maybe what you've done or what you're doing with your kids?
Well, one of the things that worked in our household, because we're split Lutheran, we were able to find a church that the kids could go to, and within their teaching, they do take them to a synagogue, they take them to a mosque, they take them to several other different environments. And I think that made having them in a religious environment much more acceptable because they showed them the alternatives. And then you can talk to them about how each one feels and thinks, and then circle it back to you, how you feel and think in life, and can start that conversation that has to keep going all the time.
I know when I was growing up, my mom was an atheist, but she believed in going to church. It was a very strange situation. She liked the village aspect of it, you know. But she would allow me to go to any church I wanted to go to. So I had many friends. So I had friends that were Seventh-day Adventists, Mormon, Jewish, you name it, I probably went to that church. And I think her allowing me to do that opened up that world as far as, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this picture. I know for a little while, my son, who was a polytheist, the Greek, he was big into Greek mythology, and he thought that was just great. So he loved it. I was like, all right, go for it, you know, why not? Have fun, investigate, read all the stuff, you know, read as much as you can, and then you come back and we'll talk about it. So he was for a little while.
Well, and honestly, I think just taking your kids to so many different churches or synagogues and mosques, you just get so many varying opinions on what is right in that church and what is right, that they contradict themselves so much that it's the best way to raise an atheist is
Yeah, that's to expose them just
When
as much as
everybody
you
is
can.
telling you they know the absolute truth and they're all different, then obviously nobody does.
Yeah.
I do, probably for about a month every year, we do kind of a comparative cultures thing that I've put together, depending on their age level, where we study different cultures and different religions. And there's a Hindu temple here in town. We've gone to the Hindu temple several times. We go to synagogue, you know, not for the service, but just to do tours and learn about it and talk to them and ask questions. And so I think very similar, just the more they can be exposed, definitely answer. Okay. Definitely, I mean, answering any questions they have, and I think any exposure, the more exposure they can get to more information, the better for that exact reason.
Yeah.
You know, it's
That's what opens it
every
up.
single one is saying that this is the right answer. You know, so at some point, back to that, you know, you give them some opportunity for free thought, and I mean, it's just common sense at that point. So.
In my own journey from being raised Catholic and eventually becoming atheist, the closest I had to kind of an aha moment actually when I was taking a world religions class here at UNO and starting to be exposed to other religions and seeing how similar they all looked. And, you know, starting to, there were already seeds of doubt in my mind, and that kind of pushed me to the point where I started seeing how similar they were and thinking, well, either one's got to be right or they're all wrong. So after I recognized that after the fact when I was raising kids, one of the ways that I kind of incorporated that is sometimes we would sit around a fire and, you know, either tell ghost stories or tell stories. And I found a lot of stories online, a lot of, you know, like Native American folklore. There are these nice short little stories that are just fun to read. And so I just kind of, now I treat Christianity, you know, just as another collection of myths, and there are some stories that are worth telling that come out of those. So I just, the perspective that I'm kind of trying to instill is that, you know, if you pull back and look at them, they all kind of look the same. They'll, you know, there are some things that you can glean from those. So one of the ways that I found that was really useful is like the folklore and things like that. They're great ways of kind of exposing kids to different cultures, but then also showing how mythology looks similar everywhere.
Kind of a follow-up on that, like with the death question. I haven't really had to deal with that either. A little bit with like pets and things like that, but when that happens, one of the things that I'm considering is going through, well, this is what I believe, this is what Christians believe, this is Buddhists believe that you're going to be reincarnated, and or you know, and I think that process will probably be good process for me to think through as well.
It's also kind of like going back to the Santa Claus question. My kids never really got a chance to ask me. I guess not really by design, but I got out in front of that, and we created our own story. We named him Solstice Claus, and so took on my physical traits. You know.
That is convenient.
So we're Cubs fans, so you know he doesn't live at the North Pole. He lives inside the scoreboard at Wrigley Field. We leave raw cookie dough and a can of Coke. You know, we just. I guess I
You would think he would want beer.
No, he gave that up quite
Oh, did he?
So I let them participate. You know, I never, you know, treated it as if it was real. Let them add their elements. Let them be part of creating the mythology. And that ended up being a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing that with them.
Other questions?
What reflections do you have? I mean, most of you have older kids. Our kids are 5 and 7, so it's preschool, kindergarten, first grade, second grade. What happens to our kids is that we didn't really talk about it much because we just both come from families where religion wasn't that hard issue. Suddenly, you know, your preschooler comes home and says, his best friend said, if you don't believe in Jesus, you go to hell. Or my teacher said God did that. I mean, I don't even think the teacher realized that they said it. You know, it's so much common usage, but the teacher is a authoritative figure, and you know, at that age you still look up very much to those sources of information. And it's a big source of, you know, of emotional trouble if they say something wrong. And so, and we haven't been very proactive about it. I mean, after that we started inoculating them a little bit so that they don't take everything for granted. I just wanted to hear some reflection on that age from you.
You know, my son's 7, and you know, we've had issues like they do the Pledge of Allegiance in school, and we had a discussion saying, you know, they say this, they say under God, this is what it means, and you can say it if you want to, but you don't have to. You can be silent. You can say under law. You can, you know, just give them different options. As far as the preschool teachers and that type of thing, depends on the context of what they're saying. If they're trying to, say, teach that child about God, that's way different than just making an offhand remark that
Well, it's also just
kind of
friends too.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
the friends,
it's
it's
peers, they don't even know what they're saying, but
It's just us, I think it's just going back and asking a little deep thing.
yeah.
You know, allowing them to create that narrative for themselves and steering it just a little bit and, you know, saying, well, you think this, well, did you consider this? Depending on their age, obviously, because, you know, they can only do so much. But
And we've already always talked about religion just because, if for no other reason, religion is out there. You know, the vast majority of people believe in one form of religion or the other. So, in order to somewhat, like you said, inoculate them, give them the tools to listen to other people and not be freaked out. You know, not to all of a sudden, for the first time, hear from someone that they're going to hell because they don't believe it. Teach them about the other religions as things go along. You know, this person believes that. Maybe we believe something different, but you know, let them understand what other people think too.
I think one of the mistakes I would have made in those situations when the kids were younger is, and I think that this is not unique to these types of issues, just parenting in general. When they're young, I think it's hard to take the long view, and you tend to overreact to little situations that by the time they're almost grown are just little blips. And I guess with the benefit of hindsight, I can see that a little bit more effectively, that it's just, there are going to be all these little situations that happen along the road, and a smaller reaction to something like that is probably better than an overreaction.
The long view was much easier on the third and fourth child than it was.
That is the truth.
yes,
Yeah.
my parenting style, I'm rather lazy, so the underreacting is not a problem for me. So.
I want to weigh in a little bit in that I think it's truly dependent on the personality of the kid. I have one kiddo who is really intense, and she takes things very literally. If someone were to tell her, you're going to go to hell, and she were to have any concept of what that means, it would scare her very much. And for her, I would be willing to step in and talk to the teacher and say, there are kids saying this to her, and it's inappropriate regardless of our beliefs. Even if that's something we believe, it's not okay to say that. And I would intervene because of how she takes it. I have other kids who it wouldn't be that big of a deal. They would ask me what it means. I can say, what do you think about it? Even at 3 or 4. And they would say, I don't know, I just wondered what it was. And then, you know, then they go get cookies and it's over. So I really think it depends. I mean, you know your child best, and you know, you're the best advocate for your child. So if you think it's something that's affecting their, you know, their thought process in a negative way, I think there's nothing wrong with stepping in and assertively just simply saying, you know, I'm not comfortable with this message being shared with my child because it's upsetting them. At the same time, if it's something that they're just wanting more information, then sure, give them more information, and no big deal at that point. So.
The other thing that I'd say too is I've come to realize in the past year or so that having religious family and friends is actually an opportunity to get a lot of teachable moments out of those interactions. Because initially, my sister and her family are very religious. Like when my youngest son was born, he was babbling or something, and my niece comes in and says, he said Jesus! That kind of stuff happens all the time. But
Like, no, it was Satan.
I
heard it.
And at first it was really annoying, but you know, just in the past year or so, I really realized that if I look at that as an opportunity, you know, for them to get exposure to these different beliefs and have those conversations, you know, it kind of puts a positive spin on it, so I'm not as annoyed as I used to be.
I have a daughter who is 3 right now, so it'll be a little while before most of the stuff comes up. But her mother and I are not together, and I anticipate her being raised religious, going to church. I think she's fairly accepting for the most part, so it shouldn't be huge to it, but I'm afraid of some of the things that are taught, like teaching that people are worthless until they accept Jesus and things like that. Do you have any ideas for bringing up these kinds of things without causing conflict between the mother and I and the
wondering the
daughter
same
and the
thing.
mother?
You had mentioned that you had a stepchild, and I'm in the same boat. Like,
Yeah.
it's a 50-50 relationship, but I'm no longer with my ex-spouse.
Right.
They're religious, I'm not. So,
All I can say is that it's never too early to start the conversation. There's always going to be those, like you were saying, those points of parenting experience where you can say, even if the child doesn't necessarily want to hear it right now, you can start that conversation even at 3. It's, that's one thing I learned from the stepson as opposed to the other children is that, like I said, it's never too young to start. It's always about the conversation, not about the individual moments. So just keep going.
And the key too also is just making sure that you're maintaining civil relationship with your ex, and you can speak with your child, and even if your ex doesn't agree with what your religious values are, lack thereof, making sure that you're talking to your child and saying, you know what, it's okay, this is what daddy believes or mommy believes, and this is what I believe, and both of those is okay. And just let them have the freedom to make that choice when they get older.
Right. And I think it's more important for the child to feel loved and safe as opposed to any of some of this other stuff. I mean, some of this will just work itself out as long as they feel safe, comfortable, loved, a place that's accepting and will allow them to ask you whatever they want.
But, you know, you're raising future adults. You're not raising children, right? So at some point they will come to their own mind and do what they want to do. You know, as long as you just give them the information, they will take it up or they won't. But you're still raising future adults and they get to do that.
You're giving them tools.
Yeah.
You're not, at least we're hoping not, you're not saying this has to be this way. We're giving you the tools to do it the way we feel is good, but at least the tools to allow you to make your own choices.
Yeah, I think an important aspect of it, kind of touching on what Sheila said, is basically reframing. Because usually when the child hears that from a religious person, they're hearing it as this is the way it is and there is no other way. And maybe just, if you can, reframe that as, you know, this is what they believe and this is what I believe in, and repeat it, you know, over years and years, you know, make sure that they see it that way. And then I think that eventually, as their own thought process takes over, they'll be able to look at it that way. I think the indoctrination, he's saying that this is the way it is and there is no other way, that's the part I would want to get out of their minds. You know, the stories, those types of things don't bother me, but if the idea sinks in that they're going to hell if they don't believe it, that's where the danger is, I think.
Give them a context.
The one caveat I do want to throw in here to all of this is I think it completely depends on how religious the other party is. If they're fairly open-minded and they're not ignoring science, they're not ignoring common sense, they're not ignoring basic sex education, I think all of this is very acceptable. I think if you're dealing with a former partner who suddenly becomes very religious or is going to completely ignore, you know, basic education in science, sex education, things like that that are fundamental tools to growing up, I think your job at that point is to do everything you can, you know, to get them proper information at their age level in a way that doesn't necessarily hit it head on. So, you know, in that situation, if that were the case, you know, if they're being told that the earth is 6,000 years old, there's no such thing as evolution, all those things, well then every single time you're hanging out with them, you guys are going to the museum, they're watching, you know, Bill Nye the Science Guy, isn't this so much fun, you know, and that matters. But, you know, you're doing what you can then to say, you know, here's the rest of the story. And I think that's important. But I do think, I mean, if it's just, well, this is what we believe, and then daddy believes this, and everybody has their own thing, well, it's no big deal. I mean, that's a non-issue.
You don't want them to have an entire segment of their life where they're ignorant.
Right, if they're perpetuating ignorance, that's when you need to, I think, do something about it, and whatever you can. But otherwise, yeah, I don't think it should be a point of, there's already so much contention between parents that are separated. If religion cannot be one of them, that would be great.
Well, yeah, if somebody's saying the world is 6,000 years old, I'd be willing to say that's wrong.
Yeah, that would be totally unacceptable.
Well, to follow up on that a little and make it a little more general, most, if not all of you, are talking a lot about religious family members, religious third parties coming into the schools and so forth. Do your kids, does it make it easier or harder, or does it make them a difference at all if these people are Jesus' love, liberal Christians, as opposed to blood and thunder fundamentalists?
Questions? For me, it's it's what's real and what's imaginary. Whether they're, I guess it depends on the age too. I mean, if they're scaring them by saying you're going to hell and this is a whole scary place, or this is Jesus loves you, the kids aren't going to be as scared if they're saying Jesus loves you. But for me, my mom says that, I'm just like, Jesus who?
Well, I think for us at least, I think it depends on how much they're encouraging magical thinking. I have a real point of contention with, this is going wrong, let's pray about it to make it better. I'm a huge fan of let's actually do something. I don't want my kids being taught that they can just pray about something and it's going to magically improve, because they need to learn to take action and control what they can. So in that sense, even if it's everything's lovey-dovey, wonderful, Jesus is love and great, they probably are still of that opinion that they can pray about things and it will improve. If they're imposing that on my kids, I'm probably going to say something to my kids. That being said, by virtue of just being in the homeschool community, I know this is shocking, but we have a lot of people in the homeschool community who are very religious. I have a lot of friends who are Christians, they're very religious. And my kids have friends, and they all play together, and they know, I mean, they'll talk about that stuff, and I don't think it's too big of a deal. I mean, I don't think we can isolate our kids in a way that, they're not going to be exposed to those things, and I think it would be a disservice to them if we did. So.
I might want to add into that, maybe that would also be a good opportunity to ask your kid what they think love means.
About?
Just if they say like, Jesus is love and they come to you repeating that, then just directly say that, well, what does love mean? And go through
And usually get to a point where we're talking about actions and behaviors, at which point, that's something you can control, therefore. You have a question?
We asked my parents who are fundamentalists to babysit the kids while we go to this conference.
You would.
We went to the Midwest Freethought conference, and then yesterday I got a phone call at 6 o'clock in the morning because they had Googled it the night before. And they go to church on Sundays, and we're okay. They're 2 and 5. We're like, okay, that's what they do. You can go. Like, we're going to be respectful for that. Like, we're obviously asking you to babysit. And they just freaked out and asked us, or told me, rather, not him. They kind of like, I don't know, ambushed me, I guess. Yeah. Basically told me that I tricked them and, like, how dare I would do that. Like, do I maintain I know they love my kids, and I love them very much. They're my parents. But do I, like, continue to ask them to babysit? Because obviously they're gonna judge like what we do when they babysit.
So they're specifically saying you trick them into babysitting
so we can go to this conference. But my dad's question was, is this a conference that condemns Christianity? I'm like, no, we all agree on that. Like, yeah. And
so they wouldn't have a problem with you doing something else for the day and babysitting.
You don't get drunk all day, that'd be okay?
They just go, well, we go and get drunk. Like,
you can
go to
tell them
concerts.
it's that we all agree on Christianity. That's a fair statement.
My way of addressing it with them is like, you know what? I asked you to babysit. It shouldn't matter what I need you to babysit for. Do you want to spend time with your grandchildren? There you go. And if you don't, then I'll find another sitter. But you shouldn't put restrictions on in what case would you babysit for me.
Right.
And put it on them. And just say, that's your choice, but it shouldn't matter.
Well, yesterday I spent all day coming up with this email that I sent them last night. See, hopefully they still babysit tomorrow. But I basically, I said you can't impose that it's immoral just because it's something you don't understand. And I do have a couple of the Dale books, and I, this is, these are ethics that we go by, and we're just celebrating those rather than having the confines of religion.
I just wouldn't
take issue with
tell my parents anymore what I was doing. I'd be like, can you babysit? It's this day, or this hour.
Correct.
Can you do it? Yes. Okay, thank you.
But inevitably they're
Drop
going
them
to
If there are things that they don't like, I mean, if it would cause them pain, whatever, to know that they're babysitting while you're doing something they really don't like. You probably already know that that was the case.
Right.
But don't use them for a babysitter at that point. You know, they don't have to necessarily babysit every time
Yeah.
or for everything. There can be a network of babysitters. It's more like, and what we try to teach the kids, respect the other person. And sometimes it's okay to babysit, sometimes not. Talk to them, you know, work it out.
I'm not that, no, I'm really like, if you want to babysit, can you babysit? Great,
Yes,
if
no.
you can't find
We're
it,
not
it's
gonna
none of your
have the
business
conversation.
what I'm doing about it, or what I'm doing while you're babysitting. It's, can you
But
babysit
when
or
it,
not?
when it
And
comes
that's
to,
it.
It's a
to
fuzzy
relatives, yeah, when it comes to relatives, they're not a hired service, really. I mean,
No, they're not.
they're part of our family. And if they don't want
Which
to
is
do
why
it.
they shouldn't matter if what you're doing. They should
Well,
want to be spending time with the children.
Right,
regardless of
and it
what
shouldn't
it
matter
is.
that people are people. I mean, we should respect their feelings.
I don't, just tell them you can have going for an orgy.
Well, between that's lying to your parents. I'm not gonna lie to them. I'm just
I-
gonna be
I-
honest with them. and-
I think it's an opportunity to decide where your boundaries are, especially at this age with your kids. And I think, you know, you have the option too of deciding if you want to say, you know, the next time you guys go need them to babysit and they say, well, what are you guys up to? Regardless of whether it's an atheist thing or not or whatever, you know, I think I would probably then say, well, I'm not really going to get into it with you because last time you decided to make a judgment about it, and maybe you're just going to go shopping. Who cares? But I think there comes a point where you just say, well, then, you know, I might try again next time. We'll see, but I'm not interested in my activities being, you know, judged. And if that works, great. And if they say, well, then I'm not babysitting, well, so be it. And take them up on the offer. I mean, find somebody else at that point or don't go, you know, and because I don't know, I tend to think that grandparents try to leverage a little bit more in that respect. And it's just not their role. So I think you can set a boundary and give them the option of how respectful they're going to be, and then decide at that point.
We had that issue where, but it was about something totally different. You know, she was trying to control what I did when she was watching the kids. And I honestly, I just said, you know, you're not gonna watch the kids anymore.
Right, I would think that'd be a good leveraging, because my parents love to watch my son, so if they were, I mean, they didn't research what I'm doing this weekend, but if they had, and they really had a problem with it, they're in my advice with right now, but then I would have said, well, you know, I can look at other options. If it really makes you that uncomfortable, then I agree with you.
Right, you
There's,
put the
you gotta
choice
open,
on them.
create more options, maybe.
I really resented being, and that's what it was.
And
It
it
was a
seems like they're
manipulation,
trying to
and I
manipulate
didn't
and
like
push
it.
it.
Well, that also goes back, if you have a lot of different options, they can't leverage something. They can't hold it over you to make you feel bad or don't do it or whatever. You just take that power away from them by spreading it out.
Yeah.
Well, do you think they would actually refuse to watch your kids because of something like this? Because I would think most grandparents
Just
would.
make your
I think
life
you've got all the leverage.
Right, I think they're gonna threaten
Yeah.
more than they're gonna
Well,
follow.
in the email, I said, you know, if you want to cast judgments on me and my husband, what we do while they're in your care, then we're gonna look at other sources. Like, you can take them for the weekend, if, you know, if that's what you want to do, but I don't think we're gonna ask you to watch them, like, we need you to.
I think I would almost just call their bluff.
That's-
Let them refuse if they want to. I doubt if they would. They're gonna wanna see the grandkids
They said
and.
not this time.
Right, see, but that's
Yeah.
exactly what I
They
think.
did say no?
They said that
This
not
time is
they're
fine.
not,
Yeah.
it's fine this time.
Yeah, and I
But
think that's
next
a
time
bluff.
don't do something like that. And it's
Yeah.
fine.
I think, but I just, I
You may
think
have to
that,
call them on that bluff.
well, right, and I
You
think,
know.
I think you'll win. But,
Yeah.
and then I think long term, you know, the worst that's gonna happen is they're gonna try and influence the kids. Where you've just got so much more time and so much more influence that creates those teachable moments that you're talking about. You know, you'll hear stories and then you'll be able to say, okay, this is what we feel. I think you've got all the cards.
And when you you almost take the power away when you're saying, you know, okay, well, I'm fine with you watching them, but if you're gonna say no, that's on you. I can't do anything about that. And I'm okay with that. I'll just find somebody else, no problem. You know, but I'm not gonna discuss my whereabouts with you anymore because last time I was uncomfortable with how that got handled.
And remember, grandparents are parents. They're still trying to parent you.
Yes.
Only you don't have to be parented.
That's the memo they didn't get.
Sometimes you're parenting them.
And remember that when you have grandchildren too.
We will all be better about that. We will not ever have that problem, ever.
All right, we have to wrap it up. This is our session here. So lunch is starting in about 15 minutes, so you have a little bit of time to